Today is Sunday, 21st of March, and I went to the, I suppose you would call it the Worldwide Freedom March in London yesterday, and such is the nature of these things now, that there was an awful lot of cloak and dagger about where it was going to be, and it supposedly was starting at Hyde Park Corner, and I didn't get off at Charing Cross. I got off a stop early because I thought they might be stopping people from getting off at the terminals. In fact, when I was on the station platform on the way, I was once again the only person on the platform not wearing a mask, and I thought, oh, here we go. And I thought the British Transport Police might be patrolling the trains, and I did get challenged by the ticket inspector. It wasn't the British Transport Police. And I just managed to sort of sidestep that, and he wasn't interested in challenging me really. And when I got off at the stop before Charing Cross, I got up and I looked behind me, and there was a few seats back. There was a woman who was also not wearing a mask, and I kind of smiled at her, and she, and as I got off the train and walked along, I winked at her as I went past, and she smiled back. So I assumed that she was, there was a conspiratorial aspect to it, which was nice. But having got off at Waterloo East, I had to walk all the way to Hyde Park Corner, which is a fair distance. I didn't want to go on the tube because I thought they might be super masked Nazis on the tube, which I later found out is actually not true, in fact. But when I was at Hyde Park Corner, or rather Speaker's Corner I was at this time, I had to run into one Lawrence Fox, who was strolling along with one James Denningpole. I asked them what they were doing, and they non-committally suggested they were just going for a walk, and with a nod and a wink. And of course that's, it's kind of funny that they were saying that, but the sad thing about it is that we do seem to be having to creep about in our own sodding country, and start lying about why we're there. And as my revulsion for the police forces is well known amongst you, it's got to a stage now that whenever I see a policeman, I feel all sorts of negative emotions. And as I was saying, I was apprehensive about going there. But such is my feelings about the police now, is that I don't think there is any emergency at all in which I will call the police. Which is quite something, you know. I mean, I suppose the only reason I might call the police in any eventuality is just for formality's sake. Like, you know, if you have to just to get a crime number for your insurance purposes or something else, but I certainly wouldn't ever call the police to actually help me, because I know that they wouldn't. And there were a lot of police there, as usual. But when I was in Hyde Park, there wasn't a sort of a mass of people gathering. And at 12:45, which was the supposed start point, you know, arranged by text on the Telegram messenger thing. And so they went across the road, across Park Lane into Mayfair, and I kind of lost them because I sort of went the wrong way, and they all went down Oxford Street and I went through Mayfair, and I lost them for something, and I thought, well, they're just going to Trafalgar Square. So I walked from there back to Trafalgar Square, and they weren't there. So I was getting a bit shagged out by this time, and I sent a message to Mrs. X and my youngest, who went online and looked at a live stream and sort of directed me to where it was, and it was up in Holborn. And as I looked up, that seemed to chime where the police helicopters were hanging around. So I eventually caught up with them in Holborn, and then we did a long circuitous route and back down along the embankment. And because of the topography of the embankment, you could see all the way down, and there were a lot of people there. You know, I wouldn't like to speculate how many, but there were more people there than any of the other demos I've been on, which was something, because early on, when I thought the police were, I thought they were snuffing it at birth, snuffing it out at birth, basically, and I was getting a bit despondent, and you know, I was thinking nobody had bothered, you know. But of course, when I did find them, there was an enormous number of people there, so that was really cheery. So I was really quite encouraged by that, to put it mildly. The BBC, of course, reported it as hundreds. God, they're such cunts, aren't they? They are such cunts. And when I was in Trafalgar Square at the end of the march, I had my Citizen X t-shirt on, and this chap recognised me, and he came up and spoke to me, and he was a teacher at a large school in an undisclosed location, shall we say, and he said he was one of almost 100 teachers in the entire school that didn't wear a mask, and I thought that was pretty impressive, you know. You know, because I've been in a situation. I worked briefly at a cement factory for a while, supposedly in charge of a load of recalcitrant Lithuanians who just had their own agenda, and they weren't going to listen to me, and they absolutely blanked me, and you know, and kind of forced me out of the picture, and I was undermined from below and undermined from above. The management didn't help, so it didn't go well basically. But you know, just one day I was just thinking, well, you know, they're just trying to victimise me, and we had this kind of sort of little tea shed where we're going to have, and I basically been banished from that for quite a long time. And then one day I just decided I was going to go and fucking sit in there, and you know, and I did, and it was distinctly uncomfortable. You know, they were, you know, actively hostile. You know, what the fuck are you doing in here? You know, we don't want you in here. You know, all that fucking shit. And you know, and I kind of withstood it for 20 minutes. You know, just to make a point. And you know, and I didn't last very much longer, so I resigned and left. But so I know what that feels like when you're in the minority of one. And this was a very interesting chap actually, and if he's willing, I might try and kind of do a live stream with him. But obviously, he's in a precarious position, so it's going to have to be up to him. So, but we got talking to, you know, about quite a lot of other things, and it was just thinking about that BBC thing, how the BBC say there was hundreds of protesters when there were quite obviously tens of thousands, or more than 10,000 anyway. I don't know how many, but you know, orders of magnitude much more than that. And it's very difficult trying to get into the minds of these people as to why a news organisation such as the BBC would, you know, indulge in all these untruths, quite, you know, obvious fabrications. Like I say, I'm not going to get into any Donald Trump speculation about how it was the biggest march ever, you know, because in some of the helicopter pictures, you know, it looks as if it's pretty sparsely spread out, and that was the case in some places. So it wasn't like standing room only everywhere you went, but like on the embankment, you know, it was pretty packed along there, and that's quite a distance from Blackfriars Bridge to Westminster Bridge. So I'm not going to try and pretend that there were more people there than there were. You know, the truth is I don't know how many people were there. I don't know for sure. But certainly there was more there than any other demo I've been to, you know. So it was encouraging, you know. And you know, you need encouragement, and I was apprehensive about going. It's Mrs. X's birthday today, so I didn't want to get arrested yesterday, you know. So there was some ruckus in Hyde Park towards the end of the day, but I wasn't involved in that. So but this chap I was speaking to, you know, we were talking about, you know, how trying to get into the heads of these people who seem determined to sort of fuck up our society. You know, they seem to be determined to do it, and it really is weird. I mean, I used to think that it was you know, that the people who grew up in the 60s are now in positions of power, but you know, the 60s is 50 years ago now, more than 50 years ago. So you know, those people, if that is the case, they would have already been gone and retired by now. And so the people who are in charge now are, you know, kind of people my age and a bit older, you know, Tony Blair's age, you know, because he seems to think that he might make a comeback. God help us. One thing we talked about is this absolute necessity for us to form an alliance. You know, because one thing you do notice in the you know, when you go to a process, is it's a ragtag bunch of people, you know, and if you were interested in the kind of woke idea of diversity, it was very diverse, with all ages, you know, men and women, young people and old people, black people, and every colour between black and white, you know. So in that instance, it was it really was sort of, you know, kind of Rainbow Nation stuff. And, you know, it made me think that one of the things that the authorities are most concerned with are people actually getting together, because they're interested in us fighting against each other and not fighting them. Because if you take an issue like a sort of totemic issue like freedom of speech, for instance, you know, if you ask most people will agree with the idea of freedom of speech. You know, like it's a given. Like it's not controversial at all. But as most people are a bit woolly-headed and not particularly principled, most people will give in to some determined person who comes along and says, oh, but what about hate speech? And then we'll go, oh yeah, well, I believe in freedom of speech, but not hate speech. Which of course means that you don't actually believe in freedom of speech, you know. So see, what we've got is we've got a whole society of people that have basically been led by the nose by a determined 2% of people. I mean, what kind of moron doesn't believe in freedom of speech? You know, so it makes me believe that there are if only we had some people on our side who were as determined to defend what you might call Western values. If we had people as determined as that, then I've just seen a Tesla with a stepladder on the roof. And so if you have people determined enough on our side, we can win all those people back, I think. But I think what's happened is that you've got over the years, over the decades, people have they've been put to sleep by stealth. Partly because if you go back to the 50s, 60s, even the 70s, even the 80s really, they probably felt that Western values were secure, that they were unassailable. You know, after the Berlin Wall came down, you know, it was capitalism was riding high, and people thought all those things were settled. Democracy, freedom of speech, you know, human rights for everyone, all those kinds of things. And because they thought they were so unassailable, they probably didn't think that they needed defending. And any crackpot who turned up and says there's 57 genders, they would just think, well, you don't have to listen to that idiot, because there's only, everybody knows there's only 2 genders. And so they thought that the values were so unassailable, like I say, that they didn't need defending. And it appears that they did need defending. And these sort of Marxist fanatics who were undermining everything just went about their destructive ways. And that's how we've got to where we are. But if these fanatics can supposedly win the hearts and minds of the woolly-headed 80%, if they can do it, we also can do it. You know, I mean, Jordan Peterson is an example of somebody who started saying pro-Western value things which were only obvious. They were only obvious, and yet people hadn't heard those things for so long. And when he came along and started saying, you know, Western society is not a racist, patriarchal hellhole, people thought, oh no, well it isn't. But nobody said that for so long, so people were sort of losing confidence in it. And I do believe that you have to argue things primarily from a point of view of principle. You know, I mean, there's a time for pragmatism, you know, but I think pragmatism comes after principles have been established. That's what I think. You know, I mean, my railing against, you know, surveillance is, you know, that quite a lot of people used to say, who were sort of on my side, would say, oh well, yeah, they're just wasting money putting all these cameras up, you know, which was the wrong thing to do, because all they would then do is, all the authorities then have to do is just come up with a cheaper version, and then, so it's cheaper, so then your argument goes. So you have to argue things on a point of view of, on a point of principle. You know, you have to win the principle. That's how you win arguments. And sometimes it's, you know, the principle has to be backed up with, you know, has to be backed up with pragmatism. You know, if you take vaccine passports, for instance, you know, my primary objection to it is the principled one, is that you know, your own body is the most supreme form of sovereignty. You know, if you don't have sovereignty over your own body, you know, you don't have sovereignty over anything. You know, I mean, Brexit doesn't even factor if you don't have autonomy over your own body. You know, I mean, you don't even have autonomy over your own children eventually. You know, as they grow up and become individuals themselves. You know, it's and while you can argue that, you know, quite reasonably that, you know, children don't actually belong to anybody, you know, one thing they don't belong to is the state, you know, and so we've established a norm, rightly in my view, that children are, to all intents and purposes, owned by their parents until they reach the age of majority. You know, whether it's 16 or 18 or 21, depending on where you are. But your own body is your own body. You know, and there is nothing that you have which is more yours. And this idea that for that, supposedly for the common good, whatever that might be, and you can imagine how that can be a movable feast all the time. That for the common good that you have to surrender your sovereignty. You know, there's no principle behind that at all. You know, I mean, people can be persuaded and cajoled and, you know, and all the rest of it, and there can be all sorts of social shaming if necessary, which people are free to withstand or not, and the weak-minded won't withstand it, and they deserve everything they get. But to be able to force something into somebody's body by law, you know, we have a word for that. Rape. And this, you know, this is why we have human rights, so that the majority cannot. There are lines that the majority cannot overstep, even when they're in the majority. You know, if there's 3 people, you know, two paedophiles and a prepubescent girl, and they're all voting on, you know, what's to be done, you know, they're going to vote to rape the child. You know, you could say that's democracy, but, you know, democracy must have its limits. You know, this is difficult to argue, and it needs a finer mind than I've got to do it, but I think you get my drift. So vaccine passports have to be, first and foremost, have to be objected to on principle. And then once you've established the principle, you can bring some pragmatic arguments into it. You know, like, you know, a 30-year-old man is at almost negligible risk from coronavirus. And there is an unknown risk, an unlikely but unknown risk of the long-term effects of the vaccination. Now, if you're 75, you know, you may very well take the position that the risk of the vaccine is significantly less than the risk from COVID. And that's a decision that you should be free to make. But even if you are 75 and you object to it, you should also be free to make that decision as well. When you're, you know, when you're 30, you know, if you're lucky, you've got another 90 years left. Now, if something catastrophic happens with the vaccine 5 years down the line, that's 55 years of life lost. You know, it might not kill you, but it might disable you. You know, it might make you infertile. Now, these are things that we don't know, and yet we're being told that it's safe. You know, it probably is safe. It probably is. But when you're already healthy, you know, your risk from COVID is almost non-existent, and so you're increasing the risk. You're increasing the risk to your health by taking an experimental vaccine that's not been tested for very long. So that's where the pragmatism comes in. And, you know, when it comes to, I mean, they're talking about vaccinating children, for Christ's sake. And there's always no risk to children from COVID. And people are prepared to, you know, give their children an untested vaccine. And who would do such a thing? You've got a healthy child. And you're going to put some experimental medical intervention into them. Who the fuck would do that? I mean, that's the same level of faith that, is it Abraham displayed when he was commanded to sacrifice his own son? And he very nearly did it, you know. But that's Lord God Almighty, you know. if you believe in such things. You know, it's not fucking Matt Hancock. This chap I was talking to, you know, he said he'd never been on a demonstration before, never in his life. He was a bit younger than me, I think, in his 40s. And he said that he doesn't make his kids wear masks in class, and most of them don't, you know. It's funny because that must really piss them off, because he can't be fired for that. So they must be fucking seething. Yes, I was very cheered up by yesterday actually, because I thought nobody had turned up, you know, and I thought that the tactics of the media and the police and everything were smothering it at birth, but it wasn't the case, you know, it wasn't the case, and it was the biggest demo I've been to. So, you know, even if you're a long way from London, you should try and get to these demos from time to time, because they do cheer you up. You feel like you're not alone if you do that. And you get talking to like-minded people, and people were just there for freedom. You know, it was just like the sort of nebulous concept that it is. You know, it's not. People know what it is when they see it. pressure up. You know, we can't have one of these marches every 6 months. You know. You know, yesterday I had a proper feeling that they wouldn't win. And I'm not someone who's prone to optimism. And I've had this feeling for a long time. As bleak as it looks, you know, I don't think they're going to win. You know, maybe it's just me being naive, but and I can be naive. You know that virtue is its own reward, maybe. And you know, most people are not concerned with this stuff because most people are not concerned with anything apart from themselves. And you know, so without wanting to sort of you know, big us up too much, it is up to us. We are the 10% or so that will make the difference. You know, and our 10%, even though it's less than the remaining 90%, we are 10 times as numerous as the 1%. And we can get the normies on side. You know, we can do it. You know, if we just have to be a bit clever about it, and we have to be, you know, we do have to build an alliance. Like I say, when I saw Laurence Fox yesterday, you know, I wished him well on his campaign, and you know, he's a good candidate for the London Mayor, you know, and David Curtin of the Heritage Party, he's a good candidate for the London Mayor, and that American fella Brian Rose is also a good candidate for London Mayor. But the difficulty with that is that you've got that may split the vote, and Khan may well get in again. Now, Khan is likely to get in for nothing more than demographics. So that I hope that there will be people enough who can see that, who can and Piers Corbyn is another one. So the Freedom side has 4 very good candidates for London Mayor. And the woke wankers have got fucking bloody Sadiq Khan. blow the Scottish Nazi Party out of the water. You know, and he's an impressive character. You know, and it seems astonishing that I would support someone like George Galloway, and I'm sure an awful lot of people are thinking the same thing. But you know, he's basically said to everybody, you know, just park your disagreements for the first time and save the Union. You know, keep Scotland in the UK where it belongs. And he might be the man of the moment, actually, because you know the Scottish Nazi Party have been absolutely mired in this Alex Salmond business. So it could show how these things can work. So we'll have to see. And it could also be an example to everybody to realise that they don't have to vote for the Conservatives to keep Labour out. You know, because the Conservatives have, you know, like the police, crime and sentencing bill that was passed on Tuesday. You know, not a single Tory voted against it. Not a single Tory. Not Steve Baker, not Desmond Swayne, not Charles Walker, nobody. Nobody voted against it. And so you've had, so suddenly with a Conservative majority, you know, elected on a wave of populism, shall we say, in 2019, promising to deliver the democratic mandate, have now basically cut the legs off, cut the idea of protest off at the knees. You know, I mean, as impossible as it seems, you know, it does seem as if the only thing worse than a Conservative government would be a Labour government. But that's no, you know, that is no advertisement for the Conservative Party at all. You know, they have shown quite categorically that they cannot be trusted. They cannot be trusted with our freedoms. You know, that they cannot be trusted with the economy. They cannot be trusted with anything. So an alliance has to be built outside of the two main parties. You know, if you hate the Tories, the Labour Party aren't coming to save you. If you hate Labour, the Tories will sell you down the river. You know, I mean, it's always been, you know, it's always been the case that the mainstream two-party system is not suitable. But everyone's always fallen for that. Well, you have to vote for them, otherwise the other lot will get in. You know, we should aspire to something better than that. You know, and if we had, you know, if we had a party that didn't have economics as a central part of its philosophy, you know, you had a party that promoted sort of free enterprise, you know, most of the time where it was necessary, and yet still supported you know, some degree of welfare state. I mean, I hesitate to say support the NHS, considering how the NHS has betrayed us all so completely over this last 12 months. But the distinction between people is now no longer between left and right, between Tory and Conservative, and it never was between black and white. You know, it never was. But the real distinction is between people who want freedom and people who are quite content to be told what to do. And I'm now in Woke Central in Brighton, which for my American listeners is like the San Francisco of the UK. But it's not quite as pretty. One of the things about you know, the authoritarians, the people who, you know, and the supposed the supposed support for lockdowns. You know, when people say they support lockdowns, as with all other things, what they're really saying is, I'm quite happy with the rules, but I'm going to make those people that aren't happy with the rules follow those rules anyway, because those rules suit me. You know, it's like when people vote to, you know, remove freedoms. They're quite happy to remove other people's freedoms. I mean, they're completely moronic as well, because they don't realise they have freedoms as well, that they're also putting, you know, in jeopardy. But they don't see it like that, because they think, well, I'm quite happy with these rules, so I don't mind denying people the freedoms that they want, because I don't want them. You know. So it's a really short-sighted and moronic viewpoint. You know, to go back to freedom of speech again, you know, people when they say, you know, I'm quite happy with freedom of speech, what they mean is, but they support hate speech. They say all they mean is that they support speech that they like and don't support speech they don't like. I mean, that's the actions of people who are without principle. And people who want to force vaccinations on other people are people without principle. You know, they'll hide behind the utilitarian argument and the supposedly democratic argument that if the majority want it, the majority get it. And if you don't want it, then, well, that's too bad. You can't do anything. You know, you can't go into a shop, go to a cafe or a restaurant or a cinema, or go on holiday. You know, but the Nuremberg Code is quite specific on consent. It says the consent of the subject is absolutely, what's the word they use? Indispensable? Something like that, kind of an absolute word. And but then it goes into greater detail about what consent includes and what lack of consent includes. It goes in quite a lot of detail in coercion and threats and stuff like that. None of that is allowed, because you have to coerce and threaten people, i.e. by saying, well, you're not going to be able to have a job if you don't have your vaccine. You know, that's coercion and that's threats. So unless they're planning to rewrite the Nuremberg Code, which I think they would struggle to do, I don't think there's any mileage in the idea of forced vaccination passports, or forced vaccination and the attendant passports. And the Nuremberg Code was written you know, by some drafted with some pretty decent minds back in the 40s after the horrors of the Second World War and the Holocaust and what the Nazis did to all sorts of people, you know, and the medical experiments they performed on them. And you know, there was, you see, because they would perform experiments on people, like they would plunge people into freezing cold water to see how long it would take them to die, so that then they knew how long their bomber pilots could survive in the sea, and they would frame that as being for the greater good, you know, because obviously they valued their bomber pilots greater than they valued Jews and gypsies and homosexuals and anyone else. So they would have framed that as being for the greater good. And as the Nazis were elected democratically, that was their justification. Oh well, it's democratically. So there you go. But I've got to go now because I'm picking my little girl up, so but we're not going to lose, we're going to win.